When someone says science fiction, what are your first thoughts? You might think of big shiny spaceships, alien worlds, and brightly colored laser weapons. Authors such as Frank Herbert, Isaac Asimov, and H.G. Wells helped popularize these tropes, and space exploration stories have been a staple of the genre ever since. Whatever else you may have imagined, you probably didn't picture America 10 years in the future after a peaceful socialist revolution whose government is now being opposed by a militant army of women. Yet in 1983, director Lizzie Borden released Born in Flames, an independent film about the possibilities and limitations of a feminist revolution. And although there are no overtly science fiction elements, Borden referred to the film as science fiction in a 1983 interview. What's the precedent for this? Let's take a look at Born in Flames and the history of feminist science fiction. In 1969, Ursula K. Le Guin published The Left Hand of Darkness, a novel about an Earthman who travels to the alien planet Gethin in an attempt to convince its residents to join a coalition of planets. At the time, the novel was unique because of its portrayal of the Gethenians, a genderless species that only display sexual characteristics once a month during their mating phase. Le Guin used this concept to explore the social implications of a world that had never known any kind of gender division or had never been at war. Considered by some a landmark text in the history of feminist science fiction, the novel has nevertheless been criticized for its use of the pronoun he when referring to the genderless aliens. In 1989, Le Guin herself said in an essay about the book that many women wanted it to go further, to dare more, to explore androgyny from a woman's point of view as well as a man's. I think women were justified in asking more courage of me. Joanna Russ, already a prominent author and critic in the field, referred to the planet Gethin as a world of men without women, and sought to reverse this concept in her 1972 short story, When It Changed. The story is set on the planet Whileaway, an Earth colony where all the men died years ago from a mysterious illness. At the outset of the story, a ship full of men arrive with the intent of reclaiming the colony. While the men expect to be treated as triumphant saviors, the women fear them and their violent recolonization of their planet. In an afterword, Russ also describes the story as a response to the all-woman society as it has been imagined by male writers. Quote, "They are either full of busty girls in wisps of chiffon who slink around writhing with lust, or the women have set up a static, bee-like society in imitation of some presumed primitive matriarchy." In her book A New Species, Robin Roberts describes the feminist utopias of the early 20th century as being rigidly separatist, their authors being unable to imagine an ideal female world that includes men. In these worlds, the full range of human activities is open to women, and issues of community, family, marriage, and interconnectedness are front and center. Whileaway appears to neatly fit into this category. However, it's important to note that Russ did not depict a perfect world. There is still violence on Whileaway, as evidenced by the 3 duels fought and won by the protagonist, and the women appear to be stratified by economic and social class. These departures from feminist utopias were necessary for Russ to explore the idea that, quote, "the characterological sex differences we take for granted are in fact learned and not innate." Russ would return to Whileaway in 1975 to expand upon these themes in her novel The Female Man, which critic Jeanne Courtiel reads as a partial allegory for dialectical feminism. Dialectical feminist thought identifies 3 stages in the process to women's liberation. 1. The alienated woman who is unaware of her own oppression. 2. The feminist revolution. 3. The liberated woman, in balance with society, who is conscious of herself as an active agent. In her book Demand My Writing, Courtiel sees 3 of the novel's 4 central characters as representative of these 3 stages. Each of these women comes from an alternate universe version of Earth with a history different from that of our own. The first is Janine, who comes from a United States where World War II never happened and the Great Depression consequently never ended. Her world is harshly patriarchal, and American women have little choice other than marriage if they want any semblance of social or economic independence. Janine's story is only told through third-person narration and dialogue, a stylistic trick that Russ uses to indicate her lack of agency and self-awareness. The second is Jael, whose future world is locked in a Cold War between the sexes. Jael, a biologically engineered assassin, sees herself as the sole representative and savior of all women, since she's the only one willing to rebel violently against their oppressors. She asserts her agency by killing men, which the novel depicts as a necessary and even revolutionary act that is part of a larger war. However, since her goal is the elimination of all men rather than the elimination of sex distinction, Jael's world cannot progress beyond its dialectical opposition. She is also the only character to never visit Whileaway, indicating her lack of place in the utopia for which she fights. The last is Janet, who comes from a Whileaway that is far in Earth's future rather than a different planet entirely. She is the complete agent, aware of her actions and responsible to her community. Yet this agency, an impossible dream for women like Janine, is paradoxically meaningless to her because she has never known anything else. In the latter half of the novel, Jael accuses her of being ignorant of her own country's history, saying, I am the plague, Janet Eveson. I and the war I fought built your world for you. The Whileawayan flowers nourish themselves on the bones of men we have slain. This is one of the ways Russ asserts that Jael's world is not a dystopia, but rather a necessary step on the path to utopia. Courtiel concludes her analysis of Janet's function in the novel by saying, quote, "The female man operates with the premise that a utopian society, to avoid stasis, must rewrite its history. The utopian society is both based upon patriarchy and imagined as beyond it, expressing the need for such a utopian space and the ultimate impossibility of reaching this space." At the end of Born in Flames, one of the editors of the government newspaper gives a speech decrying the government.
The government thinks that socialism was instituted 10 years ago, after the War of Liberation. It denies the very basis of true socialism, which is constant struggle and change. Wasn't the War of Liberation fought to create an egalitarian state? Why, then, does the government attack women, putting them out of their jobs and relegating them to secondary positions in the home? The media, the tool of the government, reinforces their position by promoting images of women as wives and mothers. We are surrounded by the...
Notice when she says, it denies the very basis of true socialism, which is constant struggle and change. This is very similar to Courtiel's appraisal of utopia in The Female Man. We can already see how these two seemingly disparate texts share the same fundamental goal, imagining a feminist utopia and how we might get there. The two share stylistic similarities as well. In the interview mentioned at the beginning of this video, Lizzie Borden describes the process of making the movie. Since none of the women in the film were professional actors, Borden worked differently with each woman to develop the character she would play and her role in the story. She says that, quote, "Each woman played both herself and represented a certain aspect of feminism within the fiction of the film." Like Russ, Borden is using the experiences of one character to represent women's situation as a whole. Beyond stylistic similarities with this one novel, though, what makes Borden's film science fiction? It takes place in a 1980s New York that seems almost identical to our own, and any of the guns we see in the movie shoot bullets, not lasers. This apparent contradiction actually makes it a perfect example of feminist science fiction because of the genre's tendency to challenge the distinction between hard and soft sciences. Hard science fiction strives for scientific accuracy wherever possible. Its fictional conceits are based on the natural sciences, like physics, engineering, biology, and chemistry. Soft science fiction is not as concerned with scientific accuracy. Its fictional conceits are based on the social sciences, anthropology, sociology, linguistics, and psychology. Instead of speculating about the physical world, Born in Flames speculates about the social world and explores the full range of implications that one single difference in our history would make. Borden herself sums it up nicely in the interview. Quote, "The science fiction in the film is to posit this thought. What if the very ordinary oppression that women have been experiencing for generations finally became something that would force a group of women to become armed and take over the media? This is science fiction because I don't believe it will happen." By referring to the film's central conceit in this way, Borden is essentially saying that an armed, all-woman insurrection is just as fantastical as a plague that wipes out all men. If both of these things are equally unlikely, we can read the women's army in this film as a feminist utopia in the same vein as Russ's While Away. Take a look at this clip from the movie showing the Women's Army in action. English-speaking viewers might not understand what is being said, but almost any woman would be able to read the body language in this scene and predict what happens before it does. I believe that the choice to have the woman speak Spanish makes the scene more universal rather than more specific. As the encounter escalates, Borden uses faster cuts and more intense close-ups to mirror the victim's panic and confusion. Right at the moment she's wrestled to the ground, we hear the whistle and cut to the women on bicycles. Their timing is miraculously perfect.
Police have been puzzled in the past week by what they describe as well-organized bands of 15 to 20 women on bicycles attacking men on the street.
The bicyclists heavily contrast with the close-ups of the victim and provide a sense of stability to the scene. These wide shots are used throughout the rest of the scene to depict the circling bicyclists and the men running away, aligning these events with safety and stability. In the final shot, we see more of the bicyclists crowd around the harassed woman to offer her comfort. Since we only ever see members of the Women's Army speaking English, we can presume a language barrier. Yet it is utterly inconsequential here. The bicyclists came to her aid, risking their reputations or even imprisonment, simply because of their shared status as women. This is where Russ and Borden's ideas of utopia begin to diverge. Unlike While Away, positioned as the ultimate goal of a feminist revolution, the Women's Army is instead one of many possible responses to oppression. It's not even a widely agreed upon response, as various women in the film decry it as vigilante terrorism or even not aggressive enough to protect women on the streets. This sort of tension and disagreement pervades the entire film, and despite how well the Women's Army works together by the end, none of their differences are resolved, merely negotiated. Here are some final thoughts from director Lizzie Borden. I didn't want to make a conventional science fiction film because I wanted it to refer to the present. Although her present is now our past, her dream of a cross-racial coalition of women still seems like an impossible future.